Imagine standing on a battlefield after the fighting has ended. There are no soldiers marching, no flags waving, no cheering crowds, only dead bodies scattered across the ground. Then you notice two men walking between the corpses. One of them carries a sack, and inside that sack is the severed head of a dead soldier. The men are not horrified. They are collecting trophies. Above them, birds circle over the battlefield, waiting for the bodies to become their food. This is not a scene from a horror film. It is a painting. And the man who created it wanted his audience to understand something terrifying. War does not look glorious when you are standing next to the dead. His name was Vasily Vereshchagin. Unlike many famous battle painters of the 19th century, Vereshchagin did not paint war to make soldiers look heroic. He painted what happened when the heroism was over. Fear, pain, corpses, and the silence left behind after thousands of men had been killed. But what makes his story even more remarkable is that he wasn't an artist who imagined these scenes from a comfortable studio. He had seen war himself, and eventually war would take the life of someone very close to him. The man behind the paintings, Vasily Vereshchagin, was born in 1842 in the Russian Empire. As a young man, he was sent to the Naval Cadet Corps and trained for a military career. He eventually became a naval officer, but Vereshchagin was increasingly drawn toward art. He traveled to Paris and studied painting under Jean-Léon Gérôme, one of the most respected academic artists of the period. There he learned how to paint historical scenes with extraordinary detail. But Vereshchagin soon discovered that he did not want to paint history from imagination. He wanted to see it himself. That desire eventually took him to Central Asia. During the Russian expansion into Turkestan, Vereshchagin traveled with military forces and witnessed the reality of imperial warfare. He saw destroyed settlements. He saw wounded men. He saw corpses left behind after battles. And these experiences changed the direction of his art forever. Instead of painting war as a magnificent spectacle, he began painting its consequences. This became the foundation of his famous Turkestan series, The Battlefield After Victory. One of the most disturbing works from the series shows two men collecting the heads of defeated soldiers. The title suggests success, but where is the glory? There is none. The battlefield is filled with death. The men are concerned only with what they can take from the dead. Vereshchagin was showing something deeper than violence. He was showing what happens when violence becomes normal. A human body becomes an object. A battlefield becomes a place of opportunity. And death becomes part of everyday life. That idea becomes even stronger when this painting is viewed alongside its companion after the failure. Here the situation has been reversed. Near a fortress wall lies a pile of dead fighters. Russian soldiers stand nearby, but they are strangely calm. One of them casually lights a cigarette. There is no dramatic reaction to the corpses. And that small detail may be the most disturbing part of the painting. The soldier has become accustomed to death. Vereshchagin understood that war does not only kill people. It can also change the people who survive it. At first, death shocks you. Eventually, you may become numb to it. And when that happens, the most horrifying thing on the battlefield can become ordinary. No more glorious deaths. This was the idea that separated Vereshchagin from traditional battle painters. Before him, military paintings often showed soldiers dying beautifully. A wounded hero might fall dramatically while still holding his weapon. Generals appeared confident. Battles looked almost like grand performances. Vereshchagin rejected all of it. In his painting, Mortally Wounded, a Russian soldier is not shown as a noble hero. He is terrified. He is trying desperately to hold his wound closed. His body is failing. His face shows panic. There is no glory in the moment, only the instinct to survive. And this was exactly what Vereshchagin wanted the viewer to see. A soldier facing death does not necessarily think about medals or patriotism. He may simply want to live. That simple truth made Vereshchagin's paintings extremely controversial. Because if war was shown as horrifying rather than glorious, then the entire romantic image of warfare began to collapse. The Forgotten Soldier. His criticism became even more direct with The Forgotten One. The painting shows the body of a Russian soldier lying abandoned on a battlefield. No ceremony, no heroic monument, no comrades surrounding him, just a dead man left behind. The image was deeply uncomfortable for Russian officials. The army was supposed to be disciplined and honorable. The idea that one of its soldiers could simply be abandoned was difficult to accept. Vereshchagin was pressured to explain the painting, but he refused to turn his art into propaganda. He believed an artist's responsibility was to show reality, even when reality embarrassed powerful people. And he paid a price for that attitude. Several of his paintings were criticized, restricted, and even destroyed. But perhaps his most famous work would make his message impossible to ignore. The Pyramid of Skulls. A barren landscape. A ruined city in the distance. Dark birds circling through the sky. And in the center of everything, a pyramid made from human skulls. This was the Apotheosis of War. There is no king standing above the bodies. No victorious general. No army celebrating. The conquerors are gone. Only their victims remain. The painting was inspired partly by stories about the conquests of Timur, whose armies were associated with terrifying displays of human skulls. But Vereshchagin gave the painting a meaning far larger than one historical ruler. It became a warning to every conqueror. Every empire can call its war necessary. Every ruler can describe victory as glorious. But when the battle is finished, the landscape may remember something very different. Ruins, bones, and silence. The message was brutally simple. Conquest always has a human price. And Vereshchagin wanted his audience to look directly at that price. When war became personal. But Central Asia was only the beginning. A few years later, Vereshchagin found himself surrounded by another war. The Russo-Turkish War of 1877-1878 would become one of the darkest chapters of his life. He once again went close to the fighting. He was seriously wounded during the conflict and nearly died. But that was not the greatest tragedy waiting for him. His younger brother Sergei was killed during the fighting around Plevna. Vereshchagin searched for his brother's body. He could not find it. And suddenly, the dead soldiers he had spent years painting were no longer anonymous. One of them was his brother. The experience changed the emotional weight of his work. His paintings of war were no longer simply observations. They became acts of mourning. And from that grief came some of the most powerful paintings of his entire career. Because Vereshchagin had spent years showing the world how war destroys strangers. Now he was about to show what war does to a family. And the next paintings would reveal the most painful question of all. What is victory worth when the people you love never come home? Part 2: When victory became a funeral. When Vereshchagin lost his brother Sergei during the fighting around Plevna, war stopped being an abstract subject. It became personal. He had spent years painting the dead. Now one of those dead men was his own brother, and he could not even give him a proper burial. The area where Sergei had died remained under enemy control, and Vereshchagin's search for his body ended without success. Out of this grief came one of his most powerful paintings, Defeated Requiem. The battlefield stretches almost endlessly beneath a dark, heavy sky. Thousands of dead soldiers cover the ground. There is no celebration, no triumphant commander, no heroic pose, only silence. At one side, a priest and an officer perform funeral prayers for the fallen. But the scale of the battlefield makes the ceremony seem almost painfully small. There are simply too many dead. The painting feels less like a record of one battle and more like a funeral for an entire generation. And this was exactly how Vereshchagin wanted it. He wanted viewers to stop thinking about numbers. Thousands of casualties sound distant, but a single dead soldier is a person. Someone had known him. Someone had loved him. Someone expected him to come home. Before the attack, Vereshchagin also painted the moments immediately before battle. In Before the Attack, Russian soldiers wait for the order to move forward. Nothing dramatic is happening. The men are simply standing and waiting. But that silence creates tension. The viewer knows what the soldiers do not yet know. Many of them will soon be wounded. Many will die. And suddenly, the ordinary faces in the painting become more important than the battle itself. They are not symbols. They are human beings waiting for a moment that may end their lives. Vereshchagin understood that the true horror of war often exists in these quiet moments. The few minutes before the shooting begins. The moment when everything is still normal. And then everything changes. After the attack, in another painting, Vereshchagin shows what happens afterward. Near field hospitals, wounded soldiers wait for treatment. Some sit. Others lie helplessly on the ground. Medical workers move among them, but there are simply too many casualties. Weapons have been abandoned nearby. And in the distance, buildings are burning. Russian and Turkish soldiers appear together among the wounded. Their uniforms are different. Their flags are different. But their suffering is identical. This was one of Vereshchagin's most important ideas. War creates enemies. Pain does not. A wounded man does not care which empire he serves. He wants water. He wants help. He wants to live. By placing enemy soldiers beside one another, Vereshchagin quietly destroyed another myth of war. That suffering somehow belongs only to the losing side. The men watching from the hill. Perhaps even more controversial was Vereshchagin's treatment of military leaders. In one painting connected with the fighting around Plevna, the battlefield is visible below while the Russian emperor and his entourage observe the action from a safe position. Far beneath them, soldiers are fighting and dying. Above them, powerful men watch from a distance. The contrast is almost impossible to miss. For the ordinary soldier, war is blood and exhaustion. For the people making decisions, it can become maps, orders, reports, and statistics. Vereshchagin wanted viewers to think about that distance. The person giving the order may never see the consequences. The soldier carrying it out sees everything. And sometimes he pays for it with his life. All quiet on the Shipka pass. But perhaps one of Vereshchagin's most memorable ideas appears in the series All Quiet on the Shipka Pass. The title sounds peaceful, almost comforting, but it is actually bitterly ironic. The paintings tell the story of a Russian soldier left guarding his position in terrible winter conditions. The cold becomes unbearable. Eventually, the soldier freezes to death. When the snow covers his body, almost nothing remains visible. Only the tip of his bayonet rises above the snow. That image is devastating because there is no dramatic death. No final speech. No glorious battle. The soldier simply disappears beneath the snow. And somewhere far away, reports can still say, "Everything is quiet." That was Vereshchagin's point. For headquarters, everything may be quiet. For the soldier, it is the end of his life. The phrase becomes a symbol of how easily suffering can disappear inside official reports. The price of victory. Vereshchagin repeatedly returned to this contradiction. Victory and death appearing in the same frame. In one painting, Russian troops celebrate after a successful battle. Soldiers raise their hats. Horses move forward. The atmosphere suggests triumph. But across the snow lie the bodies of men who will never celebrate that victory. The living are celebrating. The dead remain silent. And Vereshchagin forces us to look at both at the same time. Because he understood something that military propaganda often avoids. A victory can be real and still be tragic. An army can win a battle while thousands of families lose someone they love. That is why his paintings never feel like simple historical records. They are questions. Was the victory worth the lives? Who gets remembered? Who gets forgotten? And who pays the price? The final journey. Despite everything he had witnessed, Vereshchagin never stopped traveling toward danger. He continued painting. He continued exhibiting his work. And he continued trying to show people what war actually looked like. By the beginning of the 20th century, another major conflict was approaching. Russia and Japan were moving toward war. Vereshchagin traveled to the region again. He was already an older man. He had survived battles. He had survived serious injuries. He had watched his brother die. But he still believed that an artist had to witness history rather than hide from it. Then in 1904, he boarded the Russian battleship Petropavlovsk. He was making sketches and observing naval life. Suddenly, the ship struck Japanese mines. A massive explosion ripped through the vessel. The battleship began to sink. Hundreds of men were killed, and among them was Vasily Vereshchagin. The irony of his death is almost impossible to ignore. The man who had spent his entire career warning the world about the reality of war died in a warship. The former naval cadet who had abandoned a military career for art ultimately died at sea beside Russian sailors. The legacy of Vereshchagin. Vereshchagin left behind something more powerful than a collection of battle paintings. He left behind a different way of looking at war. He refused to show only the moment of victory. He showed what came afterward. The corpse left on the battlefield. The wounded man waiting for help. The soldier freezing beneath the snow. The grieving family. The forgotten dead. The skulls left behind by conquerors. And perhaps that is why his paintings still feel uncomfortable today. We have seen thousands of images of war through photography, television, and cinema. Yet Vereshchagин's paintings can still stop the viewer. Because he understood that the most frightening image is not always the explosion. Sometimes it is the quiet moment afterward. A battlefield with nobody left to fight. A soldier lying alone. A cigarette being lit beside a corpse. A field covered in bodies beneath a peaceful sky. See, images force us to confront something human beings have struggled with for centuries. We can become accustomed to almost anything. Even death. Even suffering. Even war. And Vereshchagin spent his entire life fighting against that numbness. He once described war as something he had imagined very differently before seeing it himself. He had expected the spectacle, the uniforms, the banners, the horses, the music, but reality was something else entirely. It was fear, pain, mud, blood, and men desperately trying to survive. That realization became the foundation of his art. He did not believe an artist should make war more beautiful than it really was. He believed an artist should make people look. Really look. And perhaps that is the reason his work remains so powerful. Because Vereshchagin never asks us to choose which army was more heroic. He asks us to remember the people underneath the uniforms. The Russian soldier, the Turkish soldier, the Central Asian fighter, the man whose name disappeared from history, the brother who never came home. All of them were human before they became casualties. And when we look again at that first painting, the men collecting severed heads among the bodies, we understand what Vereshchagin was really trying to say. The horror is not only that people died. The horror is that human beings can become so accustomed to death that they stop seeing it as something extraordinary. That was the battle Vereshchagin fought throughout his entire career. Not against one army, not against one empire, but against the idea that war should ever be mistaken for glory. He painted the battlefield after the applause had ended. And more than a century later, his paintings still ask the same uncomfortable question. When victory is built upon thousands of dead, can it ever truly be called glorious? Perhaps Vereshchagin's greatest achievement was not that he painted war. It was that he made it impossible to look away from its price.